This video is going to be a complete guide to training your back. We're going to be going over everything that you need to know from the anatomy of the back, all the different muscles and their functions, the best exercises, tips when you're training your back and how to avoid common injuries. In this video, we'll help you to get more out of your training, help you optimize your back workouts, help you to get a bigger back and also help you to get stronger at your back muscles. Just before we get started, my name's Charlie. I'm a bodybuilder, BJJ fighter, level 3 personal trainer. With over 7 years of experience in the fitness industry and have helped many clients gain muscle, build strength and lose weight. If you're interested at all in any of that, just check the links in the description. So we're going to get started with the anatomy of your back and go over all like the different muscles within it. So starting at like the top of your back, we have the traps. So these broken down into the upper traps, the middle traps and the lower traps. We also have like in the same area your rear delts and your rhomboids. Moving slightly down the back, more on the sides, you have your lats. And then in the middle, the muscles going across your spine are called the Erector Spinae muscles. Most of these muscles will work together when you're actually doing the back exercises, but there are ways that you can like focus on different ones, you can target certain ones more than the others, and you can train like each of them a bit more effectively. So now we're going to be going over the different functions of each of those back muscles that I mentioned. So we're going to start off with the lats. So the lats are mainly involved in bringing your elbows from a high position into a low position through pretty much any sort of angle. So whether that be coming up, pulling straight down to your side, pulling your arms like down from in front of you, or pulling your arms from out in front of you towards you, like if you're doing like the opposite of a bench press pretty much. So any of those movements where you're pulling from either above you or out in front of you will use your lats. As your lats are quite a big muscle, you can work different areas of your lats very slightly differently, but we'll discuss that a little bit more in the tips section. Next, we're going to go over the traps and the rhomboids, and these are very similar. The function of your traps is to move your shoulder blades. So if you're moving your shoulder blades up like you're shrugging, that will be working your upper traps. If you're doing the opposite and bring them down like you're shrugging your shoulders down, that will work in the lower traps. And if you're taking your shoulder blades and pinching them together, that will mainly work in the middle of your traps and also your rhomboids as well. So next, we're going to be going over the rear delts. Main function of your rear delts is to take your arms from out in front of you. So imagine you lift both your arms straight up in front of you, and then bring your arms back behind you. And that's the main function of your rear delts. And they are also very slightly involved in bringing your arms from straight up to straight back behind you. But the main function of them is that bringing your arms apart motion. Next, we have the Erector Spinae muscles. As I mentioned, these are like all the little muscles that go like along your spine. The function of these is to take your spine from a rounded position into a straightened position. So now we've gone over the anatomy of your back, all the different muscles and what each of those muscles do. Just before we go into the exercises, just like to make you aware of an email campaign. So it's completely free, and essentially what it is 31 fitness tips along 31 days. So each of these tips is going to massively transform your fitness journey. It's going to help you to get like the best out of your workouts. It can help you massively like improve your nutrition, your recovery, your motivation, help you with like supplements. It's going to massively change your fitness journey in just 31 days. And again, as I said, that's completely free. That will be linked in the description. We'll be starting on the 1st of January 2026. If you're watching this in the future now, you can still join the email campaign and it will just start from the day that you actually register. Now we're going to be going over the best exercises for each of the muscles within your back. So we're going to be starting off with the lats. So as we mentioned, with the function of your lats, they'll be mainly involved in bringing your arms from above down below, and also slightly involved in bringing your arms from out in front of you, pulling towards you like that. So bearing that in mind, I say the best exercise for your lats would be a lat pull down. So you can do it in different ways. You can either have like a really wide overhand grip to work your back and your lats from a certain angle, or you can have your arms more in front of you with like a neutral grip to work your back from a slightly different angle as well. Another really good exercise for your lats would be a lat prayer or a lat pullover, which is best done on a cable for safety reasons, but essentially what it will be is taking your arms from up in front of you, keeping them straight, and then pulling them down from there. So that's a really good way to isolate your lats. And your lats are also slightly involved in any sort of pulling movement. It's very similar to a roll. Other muscles will be used a bit more when you're doing the roll. So if you want to focus on your lats, try and stick to more of like those lat pull downs. Also things like chin ups, pull ups are really good, and the lat pullovers that I mentioned. So any of them 4 exercises will be really good for building your lats. Next, we're going to be going over the traps. So the best exercise for when you're training your upper traps would be any sort of shrug. So you can either do that with like a barbell or a trap bar or dumbbells or maybe a machine. The lower traps, as we mentioned, they'll be involved in bringing your shoulder blades down. So if you're doing any sort of like pull up or lat pull down and you're pulling the bar down, just make sure you bring your shoulder blades down as well, squeezing them down, and then allow your shoulder blades to come up when your arms are going up. as this will ensure that your lower traps are actually worked throughout that movement. And in the middle of your traps and your rhomboids, as we mentioned, they bring your shoulder blades back together. Pretty much any rowing movement where your shoulder blade is going to be moving from out in front of you and then pulling back and like squeezing your back and your shoulder blades together, and that will work in the middle of your traps and your rhomboids. Moving on to your rear delts. So as we mentioned, the main function of your rear delts will be from bringing your hands together, bringing them apart. So some good exercises for your rear delts would be like a bent over lateral raise, which is essentially where you're leaning forward with your legs quite a bit bent and your back straight, and you're bringing the dumbbell straight out to your side from there. Also, any sort of rowing with like a really wide grip will work your rear delts, and you can also do rear delt flies on a cable as another good variation as well to help you build up your rear delts. And then, as we mentioned as well, your erector spinae muscles are involved in taking your spine from a rounded position into a straighter position. So that will be used quite a lot isometrically when you're doing any sort of rowing or even like a deadlift movement, as they'll be working to keep your spine in that neutral position. However, if you wanted to actually like build them up, grow them and strengthen them a bit more, what you can do is any form of back extensions, whether that be like on the floor or over like a hyper extension machine, where you're allowing your back to round and then bringing it into a straightened position and feeling your muscles within your spine squeezing when you're doing that. And now we're going to be going over loads of just different tips for when you're training your back. So starting off with just some sort of general tips, try in most cases, if you can, to use a thumbless grip when you're doing any sort of rowing or pull down or just any back exercise. The reason you want to try and do this is it will help you to feel it a lot more in your back or whatever muscle you're working. Pretty much everyone is going to feel it a bit more doing it in that way. It's also going to take your forearms out of it a bit more, as if you were to have your thumb around the bar, you can be tempted to like use your forearms a bit more and you may feel it a bit more in them. Whereas if you have that thumbless grip, it's going to take your forearms out of it and therefore focus a bit more on your back muscles. And then another tip, when you're doing any sort of back exercise and you do feel like your grip has become a limiting factor, for example, like you're doing a lat pull down and you feel like the bar starts slipping out your hands, and that's what causes the set to end as opposed to the fatigue in your actual back muscles, what you can try and do is either using wrist wraps or using chalk to help improve your grip on the bar, and therefore allowing you to do more reps and just ensuring that your back is actually a limiting factor, and therefore optimizing the workout for your back muscles. Next tip is going to be to do any grip width that you choose when you're doing any sort of rowing movement. So as we mentioned a bit earlier in the video, your lats are quite a big muscle, so you can work different bits of your lats more or less depending on how you're doing the exercise. So if you were to have like a really wide grip, it will mainly be working like your upper lats as well as like your rear delts and your rhomboids and your mid traps. If you have like a slightly narrower grip, it's going to mean that your elbows more into your sides, so that's going to be working your lower lats a bit more if you were to do it that way. And then last sort of general tip is to create like a new stimulus for your back to help you like feel it a bit more, feel like a different feeling, and just help you to grow or feel like stuck on a plateau, how to break through it, is to change the attachment that you're using when you're doing any sort of back exercise. So pretty much all the time that you're training your back, you are going to be sticking to them fundamental movements like the pull down, the roll. However, what you can do is slightly changing the grip by changing like your hand position or changing the grip width or just changing the attachment, just to help work your back in a very slightly different way to therefore create a new stimulus. Okay, and then now we're going to be going over some specific tips for when you're training your traps. So first tip is going to be to, when you're doing any sort of rowing movement, try and allow your shoulder blades to round as much as possible, and also then contract them and pull them and squeeze them together to ensure that your shoulder blades are going through the most range of motion, therefore placing the most stretch on your traps when you're doing any sort of back exercise or rowing movement. So try and do that if you can, instead of having your shoulder blades like pinched together the entire time. Next tip is when you're training your upper traps and you're doing any sort of shrug, try if you can to use like a slightly wider grip, as this will align your arms more with the direction of your upper traps. So your upper traps are like pretty much on a 45-degree angle. So instead of lifting your shoulder blades straight up, try if you can to lift them slightly up and then in together at the top, which will be a lot easier to do if you were to use that wider grip. And then another tip for when you're training your traps, try and do the shrugs if you can with a trap bar, as not only will this align your hands in a better position like we mentioned in the previous tip, but it will also remove any sort of friction. So if you were to be doing shrugs with like a dumbbells or a barbell, you wouldn't have the weight like rubbing up against you when you're doing the movement, which can make it a bit uncomfortable, and that friction can also cause you to do like less reps or less weight. So by doing it with the trap bar, you remove all of that friction, and it's a better way of doing shrugs. And then last tip for when you're training your traps, when you're doing any sort of rowing movement, once you can't get any more reps at the end, try doing kelso shrugs. So essentially what they are is once you can't do any more, instead of pulling with your arms, just pull with your shoulder blades. So for example, you're doing like a roll on a machine, you're doing your set, you can't do any more, you're pulling it, you can't do any more reps. So keeping your arms straight, just bring your shoulder blades back together and allowing them to round. Should be able to get maybe like 3 or 4 of them in at the end of your set. Just give a bit of a better stimulus towards your middle of your traps. Next, we're going to be going over some tips when you're training your rear delts. So first, if you are doing any sort of bent over lateral raise and you're an advanced lifter, what you can do is at the end of your set, so you're bringing the dumbbells up normally, keeping your arms straight. Once you can't do any more reps, take your hands from facing in together to facing down like an overhand grip. And then from there, do really wide grip rolls with the dumbbells. When you are doing this, just make sure you know your elbows are pretty much as wide as you can get them, as this will work your rear delts the most. The idea of that would be that you'll be stronger, obviously, doing that rowing movement, and therefore you'll be able to get a few extra reps in after you've done your set of the bent over lateral raises. Next tip is to try and do the rear delts on a cable, as if you were to do them with a dumbbell, there will be tension on your rear delts when you're in that elevated position. However, once your dumbbells are down at your sides and your rear delts are in that stretched position, there'll be pretty much no tension on them. Whereas if you were to do it with a cable, there will still be tension on your rear delts in that stretched position. So the bent over lateral raises are still a brilliant exercise, but if you just want to try something else, you can do the rear delt flies on the cable. And then lastly, we're going to be going over just some tips to help you avoid common injuries when you're training your back. First tip is going to be when you're doing any sort of back exercise, you want to try and avoid the bar slipping towards like the end of your fingers. So the reason you want to avoid this is that it can put a lot of tension and strain on like the end of your fingers, which can lead to like injuries and a lot of pain, especially like that inner elbow pain. So if you've ever felt pain on like the inside of your elbow, in a lot of cases that is caused by the bar slipping towards the end of your fingers, which puts a lot of strain in the muscles going through your forearm, which are connected to that very inner point of your elbow. So therefore, when you're doing any sort of back exercise, try and make sure you have a nice tight grip when the bar's like deep in your palms. If you do feel like the bar is slipping at any point, either try using, as we mentioned previously, things like wrist straps or chalk, or if you need to, just stop the exercise, reset your grip, get a nice tight grip again, and then go back into the exercise. Next tip is going to be to try in most cases to avoid a behind the neck lat pull down. The reason you want to avoid this is that it will put your shoulders in quite a vulnerable position, as they'll be really externally rotated when you're bringing the bar down like behind your neck. So a better way of doing it would be to just bring the bar down in front of you. And then if you are looking for like a different variation or different stimulus, as we mentioned previously, try like different attachments and see how you feel with them. Next tip is going to be when you're doing any sort of dumbbell roll, when you're doing a variation where you do it like one arm at a time and you're having a hand on your bench. Try, instead of having your hand down on a flat bench, to try and have it on like an end of like an incline bench, so your free hands in a higher position. As if you were to do it with your hand facing down, it can lead to things like herniated disc, just because in a position of your back. Whereas if you were to have it in a more of an upper position, it will put your back in a safer position and will just also make the exercise a bit more safer. The final tip when you're training your back or just doing any exercise in general, in pretty much all cases, you do want to keep your spine in like a neutral position. This especially applies to things like squats, deadlifts, any sort of back exercise. As if your spine's in that neutral position, it's a lot safer. As your spine does start to excessively round, especially your lower spine, can lead to you damaging the disc between your vertebrae and your spine. So yeah, pretty much in all cases, you do want to keep your spine straight. The only time you really want to round it would be when you're training like abs, for example, or when you're actually training to build up the strength of the erector spinae muscles. So that's going to conclude the complete guide to back training. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to subscribe and like. As I mentioned at the beginning, there'll be links in the description to online personal training, as well as other bits on my website, as well as that email campaign, which we mentioned earlier on in the video. So make sure to check all of that out. If you'd like to see 50 tips when you're training your arms, just check the video, and this is going to be right here, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.